Welcome to the Relationship Toolbox, a show that teaches the skills we need to build healthy relationships with others. Today we have a very interesting show for you. It's going to be about how we should talk and the skills that we need to talk with representatives of government agencies. When we have a concern that we want to raise, what happens if we begin to get emotional about it? How should we prepare for talking with a representative, especially if it's in a public hearing format? And what types of protocols do the representatives themselves have to follow? So all these questions we're going to try to deal with in today's session of the Relationship Toolbox.
We are pleased to have a guest with us today who can speak firsthand about what it's like being an elected official because she has served in many capacities. Cheryl Mazzarello-Hooker is here with us today. She has served multiple terms in the Vermont State Legislature, both in the Vermont House as a representative and in the Vermont Senate. And she is currently serving on the Board of Aldermen. Welcome, Alderwoman Cheryl Mazzarello-Hooker, to the Relationship Toolbox.
Thanks, Marsha. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Tom.
So Tom and I talk about communication and the importance of being able to build and maintain healthy relationships. And in this climate, if we want to be participating in a representative democracy, we need to know how to interact with our elected officials. And so thank you for being here to give us some wisdom. I'm just going to set the context from being on the outside, because I have not been in your position, but I've been on the outside of the rail. Mm-hmm. And I think that some of the challenge comes when people push in at their most high emotionally charged time about an issue that they want to influence, and they haven't been in relationship with the officials and following, and then so they push in and they push out, and they're totally unaware of the protocols and the invisible rules that they are bound to. Mm-hmm. Have you found that?
Well, first let me say that I think when people do that and they come in at an emotionally charged moment, that they have expectations that may or may not be realistic, especially when they meet with one of their elected officials and think that because they've come to them that they're able to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That may or may not happen. And yes, I think you're right. You know, people who don't know a person personally may not realize that there's kind of a level of participation that is necessary, and we can't always expect that from our constituents even, because they're involved. Mm-hmm. You know, they have some kind of a stake in this particular issue mm-hmm. that they're coming to you with. So I would say yes, that they have to understand first that their problem may or may not be able to be solved by mm-hmm. this particular person. And it usually isn't by a single individual. It usually takes
a system.
That it has to go through.
Yeah. What advice would you have for someone preparing to bring a concern to a representative?
Have your facts in order.
Okay.
Get your facts in order. Know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Frequently, we've had people in my experience, there have been people who have signed on to things like when in the legislature we would get hundreds of postcards mm-hmm. or dozens of emails that said the same thing. So mm-hmm. you knew that somebody was just signing their name to it. Make sure you know what you're signing on to mm-hmm. and so that you can speak to your concerns and show where the basis of your concerns come from. Mm-hmm. So that's, one of the things that I think is really important for people to know.
What is it like being on the other side of somebody who's very involved, possibly emotionally charged, maybe even dysregulated? How how does that feel coming at you?
It can feel uncomfortable. It can feel threatening. It can feel kind of being put in a position where you can't deliver. And
Can't
that's
win.
not something that any politician likes to feel. And so I think that people need to understand, again, that, as you said, Marsha, it takes a system. It's not just an individual that can work what needs to be worked in order to solve the problems.
I'm imagining it's similar to any type of interchange you have with someone, a friend or anyone else, but if they come at you emotionally charged or threatening, intimidating, it's quite hard, I would assume, to hear the message that they're trying to convey and get the information that you really need, because you're dealing with your own feelings of what they're presenting to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I think people should be aware of, and most people are. You know, they don't get really at high levels of intensity when they come and want to talk about problems or issues. But if they do, you're absolutely right. It's hard to kind of parse out what the message is in, with all of the kind of noise that's going on emotionally.
How does a citizen know when they can even talk during the meeting? Like, for instance, in the alderman.
And the board, there's a portion of the meeting that is set aside for comments outside the rail. The aldermen sit inside the rail, and the public sits outside the rail. And before the agenda really begins, the chair asks, is there anyone here who wants to speak to an issue that is not on the agenda? And so they are allowed to bring new things to the board, or later on, throughout the agenda, they're allowed to speak to issues that have already been placed on the agenda.
Okay. Frequently, there's a time restraint. So, you know, I understand why that's in place, but talk to us about how that helps this process or hinders the process of somebody participating.
I think it has to do with the response of the person who's bringing the issue forward. Nobody likes to be told that they have to stop talking, I guess. But it's unfair to others during the hearing if you've overused your time. And it just, I think there comes a point in every discussion where people just kind of tune out after a while.
Yeah.
But I don't know that happens that often at the board level. People will talk and usually are given enough time to say what they have come to say. Sometimes they just go on, and you sense it. I think you sense it internally that somebody may be going on too long.
It gets back to the preparation part of it. Yeah.
Well, we've even
exactly.
talked in like preparing for an uncomfortable conversation with even a close friend that, you know, having that preparation can make it easier and make it more productive.
Sure, because you don't get distracted.
Right.
If
So
you have some
what would
kind
you,
of notes.
how would you advise somebody who's coming to talk?
Write down your points. Write down your points, go through them, answer questions if there are questions that are asked, and you never know what direction that's going to take. But usually, say at the board level, the chair will bring people back to the topic at hand.
So some of the work isn't happening in the big general meeting.
Oh, no.
There are committee meetings too, right? Can you talk about that?
Yes. Everything happens in committee, or almost everything happens in committee. The final votes take place in the larger body, but if something is going to be brought to the board, it goes through the committee process. And that's where you get most of your information, I would say. People with expertise come to the committee and they talk to you about what's happening, the pros and cons of it, and that's where the official, the person who's the representative, learns about the issues. I would be willing to bet that not every politician knows the ins and outs of every issue.
Right.
So it's very helpful during the committee process when people who have expertise come in and talk about the issues at hand.
What about a public member? Can a public person just who has a concern come at the committee level? Can they come and talk with the committee?
Usually, in our situation and at the board, there are open meetings. The public can come. People are often allowed to speak. In the legislature, it may be a little more structured. There are witnesses who are put on the agenda, and oftentimes the witnesses are the ones who are bringing most of the information, and they may have people coming with them who support or oppose an issue, and they, depending on the committee and the chair, may be given the opportunity to speak as well. But usually, I'm dealing with an issue now that, we have the meeting is scheduled for 4:15 on a Thursday. That's a late time to be having a hearing, and people don't want to be there for a long time, so the number of witnesses has been limited.
But when we talk about our rights as citizens, there are also responsibilities, and that is to know when the meetings are happening and to kind of be involved a little bit to understand the protocols on an ongoing basis before the house is on fire, kind of.
And this is pretty easy to do in this day and age because all of the meetings are recorded.
Okay.
And you know that PEG TV records all of the aldermanic meetings. At the State House, the meetings are recorded and they're put on YouTube. And you can go to the Vermont General Assembly page and find those. And so people can tune in live streamed, or they can watch recordings and learn more about the issues and what's being said. So that's, I think, an important point that people could take advantage of.
If they can't be there in real time.
Right, right.
Do representatives, whatever body you're representing, if when someone is from the public is getting out of control and perhaps even attacking personally with words and so forth, is there a code or an understanding among the members of the organization to come to the rescue of that person who's being treated in that manner, or how do they handle that?
As far as the organization that has brought the issue, or as far as
the organization
the
that's dealing with a member of the public who's brought in an issue and getting out of control or attacking the person?
Well, certainly I think any responsible organization would keep their witnesses at a respectful level, would want their witnesses to be at a respectful level.
Are there ways that you have learned, as a group to try to diffuse people that you work with, or how do you handle that type of thing, if you can?
Well, yeah. Respect is a word that I think plays on both sides of the issue.
Okay.
And so I think by taking a situation like that, being respectful of the person's right to be speaking, and yet ask for them to kindly reciprocate respectfully, may be a way that the chair usually would take care of that.
I think it's a hard time to expect people to step up and serve in politics because it is so fraught with attacks, personal attacks, and emotions are so high, whether it's a local zoning or policy or whether it's national. If somebody felt compelled and inspired to serve locally, let's say, on the Board of Aldermen, how would they go about and do that? And what kind of person, why have you been a representative?
Yeah. What's the
What's the
motive
secret
for you?
sauce?
I don't know. I've run and been elected and been appointed and lost a lot of times in the past 34 years. So I think it's a sense of wanting to give to the community, a sense of wanting to be part of the foundation that's laid for things to come. And if people are interested in that, one of the things I would suggest is that they take advantage of watching these meetings that happen, of reading about the issues that are occurring, of sitting in on those meetings. All of the meetings are open. So they have the opportunity every first and third Monday of the month to sit in on the aldermanic meetings. Any committee meeting that happens would be publicized on the city calendar, and they can go and sit in on any of those meetings. And then there's the whole process of running and wanting, letting your desires be known. You'd have to fill out your petition, get the signatures necessary, hand it in, and then start campaigning. And that's, the fun of it in the middle of winter.
Now, I hear you say that all the meetings are open, and I know that that's a law to have open meetings in. But there is that little component that I think the public might sometimes misunderstand called executive session. Yeah. So can you explain what that is, why it is, and what kind of things happen in executive session? Because that's not public.
Right. An issue may be brought to executive session if it's deemed problematic for the city, that perhaps a premature statement or discussion of it in public would put the city in an untenable situation. Okay. So the city attorney will say, because of this, we'll take this into executive session. A lot of times it's personnel issues, and you don't want to bring people's names out into the public. And the committee will go, the board will go into executive session and then come out and perhaps vote on an issue, or wait and send the issue to committee for more discussion.
So it's a delicate issue. It's something that it's premature to talk about. Nobody's trying to hide anything.
No, I don't, there's nothing, I don't believe that you can bring up other issues in executive session unless they've already sort of been looked at or talked about or put on the agenda prior to.
How do you respond to other forms of media, that it might be through the paper or other things where people are maybe misinformed and making public comments about this? How do you as a group then either correct that misinformation, or when do you respond, when do you decide not to respond? Is there a way that you've worked to know how to respond to other forms of medium coming at you?
Well, I'm sure you've felt that sometimes the report of meetings that you've been at were different than what you remember.
Meeting? It doesn't seem like that.
Exactly. And yeah, it would be, certainly if it's an egregious misstatement, there would be something done. Somebody's going to talk about it, and then there might be something either in the paper or on the news that they're correcting that situation. I think that as far as people reading or hearing things that may or may not be accurate, then it's incumbent upon people who are involved in the process to let them know, whether it's personally or if they choose to write a letter to the editor or call the radio station or whatever. But certainly it's up to elected officials to comment, I think, when something is not accurate.
Not accurate, but beyond that, it could be just point of view, perspective,
Right.
and freedom of speech.
Right,
And
making
that's-
that distinction.
And we
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
we need to
And so-
uphold that,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
Talk about the big elephant in the room, Robert's rules. I think that is really opaque to most of the people out in
And
the
who
public.
interprets
And like,
Robert's
I know,
rules?
it's there to protect, but it can be so. It can be
Seems
such
to be stifling
well,
sometimes.
or misunderstood, or not understood. So, help us understand.
Well,
that.
I think that you have to have rules. You have to have
for
rules.
consistency and
Yes.
fairness.
And so you can't have people just blurting things out. You have to be called on. You have to. If something is not appropriate, then you have to be called out for that. So all of these things come into play. The legislature has all kinds of rules that, frankly, I'm not up on. And it's sometimes a surprise when things happen. But again, it just goes back to having to have a system in place so that you're not just running ripshod over, any of
It
the
seems-
discussions.
I
that are
totally
happening.
agree, but it seems complicated sometimes.
It is complicated, and frankly, again, from my own experience, I haven't read all of Robert's rules, and occasionally may be misstepping, but
So we, as either representatives or members of the public, are all held accountable by this framework. Where do we learn these things?
in your civics classes,
What class?
Yeah, but it's complicated. I have been exposed to them in boards and in organizations and tried to adhere to the ones, but I'm wondering if that's just something that's lacking.
well, usually you leave it up to the parliamentarian, and
Or the clerk, or,
to the clerk. The clerk of the House is the person you'd go to with parliamentary questions. The Secretary of the Senate is the person you'd go to with parliamentary questions. The clerk at the board and the city attorney would be the ones to go to with questions of parliamentary procedure.
One of the things that we advocate just in terms of communication is the power of the question. That how even in conflict, rather than going at different positions and trying to fight it out, people can explore each other's point of view, their perspective, where it's coming from and so forth. Is that something that is commonly practiced, or do people rely on Robert's Rules of Order in dealing with things? Do you feel that the boards really explore each other's point of view?
Oh, I think they have to. I think they have to. And you may not like what the other person is asking, but it's always good to learn why they're asking those questions, where they're coming from, and for them to experience what you're asking and where you're coming from. So it plays on both sides. Nobody has an upper hand in this, as far as I can see. Although it might appear that an elected official would have the upper hand, the authority, but certainly it's learning from our constituency that is the best education for any politician, I think.
How do you go about that to know, because your constituency could be all over the place?
Go to the grocery store.
So Tom and I had done a show on boundaries, and I was thinking about that actually. Like, how do you balance having a private life and being available and open to have anybody address you anytime that you're out about something that you're facing in the town, in the city?
It can be very time consuming, so that it sort of takes up a lot of your personal time, but it's also very enlightening when you meet somebody who has an issue, and perhaps you think that everything is just fine and it's going to go swimmingly, and then somebody comes up to you and points out the flaw in that particular proposal. So it's really, it can be a real education. I think that at the local level, it's a lot different. Certainly at the federal level, I mean, we see all the time federal officials being threatened and having to have bodyguards or security all around them. We live in a rather small state, and that gives us access to our political representatives. And that can be a good thing, or it can be an all-consuming thing, which is, you know, it's the way you have to accept you have to understand that you're putting yourself out there and that you are going to be approached and that people will expect things from you. And just hope that you can deliver on the good things and maybe
to
talk
understand the other
them
hand.
out of.
What's your preferred method of someone informing you of a concern that they have? Is it in a written format, a call, a conversation?
I think it depends on what the issue is. If it's really involved, both.
Okay.
I like to do face-to-face or phone calls. There are people who are certainly much more adept at computers and stuff and can write things up very quickly. But if you want to register a complaint or a concern, a letter to a representative is fine. A phone call to a representative is fine. Go to the meetings, speak to people inside the rail, and let them know what you're thinking.
Well, Cheryl, this has been enlightening, and we understand that just showing up, this is a big job, and what the public sees is just a tip of the iceberg, and that there's time invested. We thank you for your many years of service throughout the state and local area, and we appreciate you joining us today for the Relationship Toolbox, and we hope to see you again soon.